After spending nearly 3 decades on death row, Charles Victor Thompson was executed by lethal injection on January 28, 2026, at the Huntsville unit in Texas. But long before his final moments, a violent chain of events unfolded that would leave 2 people dead, a teenage boy traumatized, and a community shaken. To understand how Thompson ended up on death row, we have to go back to Houston, Texas, in the late 1990s. In 1997, Thompson was 27 years old and already deeply involved in criminal activity, heavy drinking, and drug abuse, particularly cocaine. It was during this time that he met Glenda Dennis Hayslip, a 39-year-old nail technician in Houston's nightlife scene. Dennis was a hard-working single mother raising her 13-year-old son, Wade, following a recent divorce. At first, Thompson presented himself as caring and dependable. He promised Dennis that he would protect and provide for her and her son. What began as a friendship soon turned into a romantic relationship, but the charm quickly faded. Over time, Thompson became controlling, jealous, and increasingly violent. His substance abuse fueled unpredictable behavior, and the relationship grew toxic. Dennis endured repeated physical abuse. Coworkers later testified that she arrived at work with bruises on her face on more than one occasion. Thompson admitted during the investigation that he had slapped her, causing visible injuries, though he attempted to minimize the severity of his actions. Despite his claims, the violence was undeniable.
After roughly a year of abuse, Dennis made the difficult decision to end the relationship for good. She wanted safety for herself and her son. Around this same period, she reconnected with Darren Keith Cain, a 30-year-old bartender she had previously known. Their relationship began as a friendship, but soon developed into something more. Those close to Dennis described Darren as calm, loyal, and protective, everything Thompson was not. For Dennis, the contrast was striking, and for Thompson, it was unbearable. Thompson refused to accept the breakup. He began stalking Dennis, calling her repeatedly, and showing up uninvited at her apartment at the Waterman Crossing complex. He confronted her about Darren, demanding explanations and threatening violence if she did not return to him. By late April 1998, the situation had reached a breaking point. On the night of April 29th, Dennis called Darren in tears around 2:30 a.m. She told him Thompson had forced his way into her apartment and was assaulting her. Darren immediately rushed to help. When he arrived, a violent confrontation erupted between the 2 men. The fight lasted nearly 15 minutes, ending with Darren overpowering Thompson. Humiliated and beaten, Thompson suddenly shifted his demeanor. He apologized, claimed he would accept Dennis's decision, and begged for mercy. Believing the danger had passed, Darren extended his hand in peace. The 3 sat outside the apartment, talking and even sharing a beer. When a sheriff's deputy arrived responding to a domestic disturbance call, everything appeared calm. Thompson was escorted off the property. But the calm was an illusion. Deep down, Thompson was furious, consumed by jealousy, humiliation, and rage, and the night was far from over.
After being escorted away from the apartment complex by law enforcement, Charles Thompson did not go home to cool off. Instead, he drove to his residence, retrieved a semi-automatic handgun, and waited. Roughly 3 hours later, in the early morning of April 30th, 1998, Thompson returned to Dennis Hayslip's apartment. By then, Dennis and Darren likely believed the danger had passed. They had survived the confrontation, spoken with police, and finally felt safe enough to rest. That sense of security would prove fatal. Around 6 a.m., Thompson approached the front door and violently kicked it in, shattering the lock. The crash echoed through the apartment. Darren, who was in the living room, stood up to investigate. He never had a chance. Thompson entered with the gun already raised and immediately fired 4 shots at Darren Cain. Bullets struck his neck and chest.
As Darren attempted to escape, Thompson shot him in the back. Darren collapsed to the floor, critically wounded, but still alive. In a desperate act, Darren grabbed Thompson's leg, trying to stop him from reaching Dennis, who had emerged from the bedroom and was running toward the kitchen to defend herself. Thompson broke free. Standing over Darren's body, Thompson placed the gun at the base of his neck and fired one final shot at point-blank range. Darren Keith Cain died instantly. Meanwhile, Dennis ran toward the kitchen, attempting to grab a knife. Evidence later showed Thompson fired again as she fled, with a bullet lodging into the pantry baseboard. He caught up to her, restrained her, and deliberately reloaded his weapon, a critical detail that demonstrated clear intent and premeditation. Thompson pressed the barrel of the gun against Dennis's right cheek and threatened her before pulling the trigger. The bullet caused catastrophic injuries, destroying teeth and severely damaging her tongue. Despite the devastating wound, Dennis remained alive. A neighbor, later identified as Coker, heard the gunshots and rushed into the apartment. He found Dennis sitting in a pool of blood, struggling to breathe. Thompson was still there. When Coker asked if Thompson had shot her, Dennis nodded. Shortly afterward, Thompson fled the scene. He drove to Cypress Creek and threw the murder weapon into the water, attempting to eliminate evidence. But rather than disappearing, Thompson did something unexpected. He went to the home of an acquaintance and confessed in detail to what he had done. He then contacted his father, who assisted him in turning himself in later that morning. Thompson surrendered voluntarily at a police station, stating he was willing to cooperate. While Thompson was confessing, Dennis was fighting for her life. She was airlifted to Herman Hospital in Houston in critical condition. Despite emergency treatment, she fell into a coma due to severe oxygen deprivation to her brain. After a week on life support, her family faced the impossible decision to let her go. On May 6, 1998, Glenda Dennis Hayslip died. She was 39 years old. Her son, Wade, only 13, learned of the tragedy while at school. He had warned his mother about Thompson, and now his worst fears were reality. Charles Victor Thompson was arrested on April 30, 1998, the same day as the shootings. Authorities later recovered the murder weapon from Cypress Creek, reportedly based on information Thompson himself provided. In 1999, Thompson stood trial in Harris County, charged with capital murder. Prosecutors sought the death penalty from the start, citing the brutality of the crime and clear premeditation. While awaiting trial, Thompson's behavior grew even more disturbing. In July 1998, a fellow inmate informed authorities that Thompson was attempting to arrange the murder of a key witness in his case. Law enforcement launched an undercover operation. An agent posing as a hitman secretly recorded Thompson discussing payment and confirming the need to eliminate the witness. The recordings became damning evidence. On April 14, 1999, the jury found Thompson guilty of capital murder and sentenced him to death. Years later, in 2005, Thompson carried out one of the most shocking jail escapes in Texas history. Using civilian clothes, a fake ID, and exploiting staff negligence, he removed his restraints, walked out of the visitation area, passed multiple guards, and exited the jail in broad daylight. The escape triggered nationwide alerts and a $10,000 reward. For 3 days, Thompson remained on the run, traveling nearly 200 miles to Shreveport, Louisiana. His freedom ended on November 6, 2005, when he was arrested outside a liquor store, intoxicated and unresisting. He was transferred to death row, where he would remain for nearly 20 years.
On September 11, 2025, Charles Victor Thompson officially received his execution warrant. His death was scheduled for January 28, 2026. On the morning of his execution, Thompson was awakened by prison staff around 6:30 a.m. He spent his final hours reading, meeting with attorneys, and speaking with a spiritual advisor. Texas does not allow special last meals, so he ate the standard prison food. At approximately 6 p.m., Thompson was escorted into the execution chamber. He was secured to a gurney as IV lines were inserted. When asked for final words, Thompson whispered something inaudible to witnesses. The lethal injection began shortly afterward. Witnesses reported minor signs of discomfort and irregular breathing before Thompson lost consciousness. At 6:15 p.m., Charles Victor Thompson was officially pronounced dead at age 55, bringing an end to a case that began nearly 3 decades earlier and forever altered the lives of everyone involved. Following the execution of Charles Victor Thompson on January 28, 2026, the case that had haunted 2 families for nearly 3 decades officially came to an end. While there were no further legal appeals or court actions remaining, the aftermath of the execution sparked renewed discussion across Texas and beyond. Within hours of Thompson's death being confirmed, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice released an official statement verifying that the execution had been carried out according to protocol. Officials acknowledged minor physical reactions during the procedure, but stated that the process ultimately resulted in death without any complications that would require investigation or review. For the families of the victims, the execution represented closure, but not relief. Relatives of Darren Keith Cain issued a brief statement expressing that while Thompson's death could never bring Darren back, they hoped the conclusion of the case would allow them to finally move forward. They described Darren as a man who stepped in to protect someone he cared about and paid for it with his life. Glenda Dennis Hayslip's family echoed similar sentiments. In interviews conducted days after the execution, family members emphasized that Dennis had tried to escape a violent relationship and deserved safety, not fear. They also spoke about the long emotional toll the case had taken, especially on Dennis's son, Wade Hayslip. Wade, now an adult, declined to attend the execution and chose not to give an in-person statement. However, through a family representative, it was shared that the trauma of losing his mother in such a brutal way never fully faded. The execution, while final, did not erase the memories of that morning in 1998. Instead, it marked the end of a chapter that had followed him for most of his life. Public reaction to Thompson's execution was mixed. Supporters of the death penalty argued that justice had finally been served after 27 years of appeals, delays, and incarceration. Many pointed to Thompson's actions, the premeditated murder, the attempted witness killing, and his later prison escape, as proof that he remained a danger and that the sentence was justified. Opponents, however, raised broader concerns about the length of time inmates spend on death row and the psychological impact of decades-long confinement before execution. Several advocacy groups issued statements questioning whether prolonged death row incarceration serves justice or merely prolongs suffering for all involved. Legal analysts noted that Thompson's case was often cited in criminal justice discussions due to its unusual elements: the calculated return to the crime scene, the deliberate reloading of the weapon, the attempt to silence a witness, and the rare, bold escape from custody years later. These factors made the case a textbook example of aggravating circumstances in capital murder prosecutions. No post-execution investigations were opened, and no new evidence surfaced that altered the original findings. Thompson's convictions and sentence remained legally sound through every level of review. In the weeks following the execution, the Huntsville unit resumed its normal operations. Thompson's body was released according to state procedures, and the case file was formally closed. What remains is the lasting impact. 2 lives were lost. 1 child lost his mother. Multiple families endured decades of court proceedings, appeals, and public scrutiny. And a case that began with domestic violence escalated into a tragedy that ended with the ultimate punishment under Texas law. Charles Victor Thompson's execution did not rewrite history, but it finalized it. The story now stands as a reminder of how quickly violence can escalate, how warning signs are often ignored, and how the consequences of one person's choices can ripple across generations.